All right, so today we got another HVAC deal, one that I think is kind of interesting, and we're going to do a few more HVAC deals just because they're always interesting right now, at least while the market is shifting. There's some like this one that are on the higher end of really where it should be, almost above where it should be, and really it kind of is above where it should be. And so it's interesting as we see these deals correct based on the market, looking at them. And so that's why, I think this is going to be a good one to break down here. This is a pretty well established one, 19 years in. It is not clear if it's commercial or residential. However, with maintenance contracts and otherwise, I'm quite sure it's residential. But somewhat quick shout out here to Transworld, awesome brokerage. So that's also why I chose to break this one down, because this is one where Transworld, they understand creative deals. They understand seller finance. They understand those elements of a deal, and they're all about getting deals done with those structures. And so that's why I think they're pretty awesome. Love breaking down their types of deals because they're also very good at giving the right information that a buyer wants to see. And also somewhat because this is a deal we're actually going to be reaching out to and approaching for a visa setup that we're doing right now, so that I can do more deals in the U.S. So interesting deal. $6.5 million is the asking. 1.44 is the stated cash flow. This is definitely not not good data. I don't believe, because they say their revenue is only $3 million. So there's no way an HVAC deal is doing 50% margins at that level of scale. Unless they're pretty much entirely a service business. They have to be running a very tight ship, which the numbers don't line up for it. So you'll see when I break this down how we kind of account for this. Obviously, I'm accounting for it pre-getting data because I'm not going to share, once we enter into NDA, I'm not going to share that data. But obviously pre-data, and I'll kind of show you my assumptions. But a couple things that are really good about this business, things that stood out. One, the area for me is kind of what I'm after. The other is 19 years in business. That's always great. We want to see 10 plus years for HVAC. 15 plus is better because that means they've gone into second cycles of replacement. And as long as they can show that there's strong numbers on that of getting repeat replacement customers, it's what you want. Customer file of 5,000 and 1,000 active maintenance contracts. That's huge. 20% of their database and maintenance contracts is massive. That means they've focused on this from the start, or at least in the last 5+ years. And so they've done some good moves there. And of course, having a bunch of 5-star reviews always helps. Now, this isn't the clear picture, right? This isn't saying that they have a 5-star rating, but that they have a certain number of 5-star reviews. But this, it's a pretty good starting point. But this also, to me, looks interesting in the sense of if maybe they didn't solicit for reviews as heavily during their sales process, there's a lot of juice here, right? Because they have 5,000 customers, 1,000 maintenance contracts. If they've only got maybe double this in terms of reviews, 200, that means I can go and get them to 1,000 reviews in a very short space of time, which means they can destroy the competition in terms of ability to generate SEO based business. So interesting in that perspective. And the other thing that I always like is that they're listed by Transworld. I do also like that they actually specify competition clauses here. This is something that, for most folks when they're retiring, right? This is a retirement. This usually is not a area of negotiation. The guy just doesn't care. It's interesting that they specify it. I usually like 100 to 150 miles in 3 to 5 years. Ideally, 150 in 5 years. But you get what you can get. But at least it means they're thinking about that. 6 employees on a $3 million in revenue company. Also kind of interesting. This is more of an orange flag for me because that means they use subcontractors. There's no way you can run $3 million in revenue on 6 people. So that means there's subcontractors involved in the work, which can be either really good or really bad, just depending on how they manage that. So interesting one there. Also, the fact that it's run home-based. At $3 million in revenue, this being run without a core facility or warehouse is very interesting. It means that they are a pure sales and marketing organization, not a delivery organization, which does leave juice to squeeze because in turning it into both, you can lower your margin, or sorry, increase your margins. You can lower the potential for bad business and so on. But it's also kind of scary in that if you don't have tax, I mean, these subs decide to go somewhere else because you screw up something, you're out of business, right? So there's risk there, but it's also kind of interesting. And I somewhat prefer the operations to be like that, assuming there's extremely stringent terms with the subcontractors to ensure highest of quality. So very interesting business as I look at it. And it kind of fits a lot of what we're after. And I mean, obviously, this also is kind of its own little flag of showing no inventory. That obviously means that the subcontractors do that, and they must have a very strong supplier relationship to not have to carry anything. But again, that's just more juice, because if they're just buying units as the job comes in, we can actually shift up and immediately start buying inventory and get even better rates. And as a result, if you buy well, you know how to buy properly in this type of business, you can add 2, 3, 4 points to your margin. So overall, very interesting business. There's some things that are somewhat flags until they get explained, and we'll obviously see as we go through this deal. But in terms of kind of vetting the deal structure, just to show you and walk through here. So scenario that we're basically looking at here is a $6.5 million ask. Obviously, the SBA won't do $6.5 million, and so it goes beyond the SBA limit. But this is Transworld, and that's why I said I called these guys out to begin with, which is Transworld understands structures that are required, and when they typically do a lot of SBA listings, they understand trying to make it fit the SBA to both fit for the buyer and the seller. So let's take a look here. So revenue, $383 million. Their cash flow, as they estimate it, is 1.477, which, I mean, is basically impossible, to be super blunt. There's no way to have margins like that in HVAC. Commercial maybe, residential definitely not. So basically what we'd be looking at the very least in terms of adjustments here, there's likely an owner salary that is being added back here that shouldn't be. And so I've just aligned it to assume a general manager, about 150 grand. And there's probably more in there that really shouldn't be added back. But I'm not quite sure what is yet. We have to see as we narrow farther. But those things get adjusted in here, right? If the owner is doing 6 different jobs, maybe the owner's the sales guy and they're the general manager and they're all these other jobs, you have to adjust accordingly, right? And so as an example here, if the owner is the is the salesperson, that means there's no commission being accounted for in here. That would account for the extremely high margin. And so if you now have salespeople, you have to account for commissions. And commissions, anywhere from 5% to 15% on these types of deals. And so if you look at it and you say, hey, let's say 70% of this is replacement jobs. Oh, put this in brackets here. There we go. So if 70% of this 3 million is replacement jobs, 2.13 million, well, you got to pay commission on that, right? And so let's say it's an averaged out, let's say it's low, 8% commission, you got to account for $171,000. And so with just some small adjustments that are things that they would obviously want to be able to fight for and say, hey, yeah, the owner's doing it all now, I'd assume that you're going to do it too. It's like, no, that's not how it works. When you finally get those numbers down, you've already shaved off $300,000 off the cash flow. And now you're getting more into a reasonable margin. And so high performing HVAC residential, honestly, I would expect extremely high performing, maybe $1 million, $1.2 million. Average performing, $700,000 to $800,000 or less, right? On 3 million, I mean, a poorly run company would probably do 400,000, right? They do just over 10%. But that said, again, these are things that have to get investigated, right? So I'm just assuming right now, maybe, give them the benefit of the doubt. They're just amazing at operations. The owner does shit all in the business other than just managing and no other hats whatsoever, in which case we adjust 150 to place a general manager. And so, 1.3, the debt service really isn't the biggest of issue in this deal. The biggest one, of course, is the asking price. And this is why I like Transworld deals, is this is close enough to the SBA limit that they would talk to their seller to figure out, how do I get you to a 5 million pure SBA? So that way we can leverage the bank and get this deal done. In which case, getting them to negotiate 25%, or more realistically, they're going to try and push for something like this, 23%, 22%, whatever gets you just at the limit. But you'd want to push for 25%. So you have your seller finance at 1.6, you have your financed amount at 4.8, and you're just within the SBA loan limits. And you're at a not great DSCR, not a great service ratio here, but you still cash flow $500,000 at the end of the year on this. Now, obviously, that's assuming all of this checks out at 1.3. But what I would more so look at, this is just baseline how you look at it. The scenario that I would personally be after is that we're going to come in, we're going to account for commissions because that's likely the element missing. And, I'll call this, I'll give them the further benefit of the doubt that it's only 60% and that it's, 10% because that's pretty likely. So they're at 1.1 in cash flow. I would want to see this go for probably 4 high end, but I'd probably start at 3.5 times, to be honest. That's just what the market is dictating. That's what the market looks like. And so we'd come in at 4 million as an ask. And I would just, lower this down to make it in their favor to try and get the deal done, where we're paying out 3.4. We're, holding back only 15%, or if we can really negotiate it, the bank will only ask for 10. We would negotiate that, and we would come in because there's some good juice to squeeze, and we're still ending up in a scenario where our debt service ratio gets close to where we want to be. But we'd probably settle for something like a 4, right? This number is it's just not going to happen, right? It's just, they're never really going to get there, unless a private equity buyer comes in, but private equity hates this space right now. So this market is a buyer's market. This particular industry is in a buyer's market. And that's why, that's also why we're approaching it, because I feel I can come in and get this type of value out of it where I can buy it for a reasonable amount. I have juice to squeeze. I can get this revenue up, $1 million in the first year. I can get the profit optimized a little bit more in the first year, get a couple percent on it, and have this sitting at a real 1.5 million in cash flow, not just, an estimate with a bunch of other stuff in it, but I can get it to $1.5 million in cash flow within, 18 months, 24 months. And, so that's what we would look at in this type of deal. And this, this type of structure is something more that Transworld understands entirely, and would be within their wheelhouse. So interesting deal nonetheless, but by all means, if you have deals you want me to look at, help you structure and look at how we would look at this, by all means, drop them in the comments, ping me, send me a message. We're happy to always take a look and do some structures, especially if we can create more cool content to help you guys get some ideas of how we look at things.